I welcome you to today's talk on Gita Insights on Terrorism. I'll be speaking this in three parts. First, the philosophical understanding of how the Gita analyzes the world. Second, we will discuss some practical socio-political realities and how they can be seen in the light of the Gita's vision. And then we will look at practical responses based on the Gita's insights for us in today's world. So the Bhagavad Gita is a book that is essentially a Vyavahara Shastra. It is meant for functioning in this world. And for functioning in this world, it gives us practical guidance of how we are meant to live. And its practicality can be seen especially from the point of how it is spoken on a battlefield. In a war field, when a person is when a war is about to start, there can be few situations more urgent than that situation. And in such a situation, for a book to be relevant requires it to be to connect whatever wisdom, whatever philosophy it has with the practical realities. So the Bhagavad Gita draws on the Sankhya system of philosophy to analyze the world in three modes of material nature. So that is goodness, passion and ignorance. These are the English translations for the Sanskrit word sattva, rajas and tama. So sattva basically refers to existence. It has many meanings. One meaning is existence, and it refers to that state or condition of living in which people are steady, when things are maintained. Then rajas refers to that which causes change, that which especially brings about new things. And tamas is often equated with darkness, and it refers to that which destroys. Now, creation, maintenance and destruction are three features of existence itself. There is everything, even our own body, new cells are being formed, many cells are being maintained, and old cells are dying out. So creation, maintenance and destruction are constantly happening in this world. And when these happen, the important thing is to recognize that they are happening. There will be specific instruments through which they happen, but they are happening as the normal functions of material nature. Now, although the material world is temporary, even while living in this temporary world, we need some amount of stability to function. Just as in a ship, if people are moving, the waves underneath the ship are moving and the ship is also going to move. But an expert captain ensures that the movement of the ship, the restlessness and the turbulence in the ship is not too much, that it is steady enough for people to function. Similarly, although changes are going on in this world, creation and destruction are constantly happening, that there is some amount of stability, and bringing about that stability so that people can go about with their lives, doing their material responsibilities and pursuing their spiritual aspirations. To go around with this, people need to be having some stability, and dharma is what brings about that stability. Krishna himself descends to establish dharma. Dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. So dharma has various definitions. From a transcendental perspective, dharma is defined in the Bhagavatam as that which enables us to love God. Savai pumsam paro dharmo yato bhakti radhokshati ahaitukya pratihata yayatma suprasidati. That which enables one to develop pure love for God, unmotivated and uninterrupted. The Bhagavatam 1 to 6 states that is pure. That is actually dharma. That is Bhagavad dharma. Now, why that is the ultimate, that is the order that will bring, means dharma essentially refers to the orderliness of things. The soul's orderly state is to be in harmony with the Supreme Soul. And Bhagavad Dharma enables us to attain that harmony. Along with that, there is dharma in this world, and dharma which Krishna comes to establish is ultimately to pave the path for Bhagavad Dharma, but to create order in this world also by destroying the infidels, destroying the miscreants, as Prabhupada translates. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. In 4.8, Krishna states that he comes to protect the pious, to destroy the impious, and to establish dharma, as he comes again and again. So now, if we see, it is the responsibility of the kings, especially, to maintain dharma at a socio-political level. And that's why there are Raj Rishi. A Raj Rishi, this fourth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where this verse about dharma establishment comes, it tells before that Evam parampara praptam imam Raj Rishayo viduhu. Raj Rishi refers to those who are saintly kings. And the Raj Rishis need to do both. They have to have spiritual vision, that's the Rishi part, and Raja part. They have to have political acumen. They have to have political expertise to know how to manage things at a practical level. So the practical and the transcendental have to go together in the saintly kings. Raj Rishi literally translates as royal sages. Srila Prabhupada often translates it as Raj Rishi, as saintly kings, which would be Rishi Raj. But either way, the point is, there is the spiritual and the political, or the martial or the administrative, which are brought together in one vision. So normally it is the duty of the Kshatriyas, the administrators of the state, to maintain dharma. Now, one major difference between the Kshatriyas of the past and the Kshatriyas of today is, in the past, the martial and the administrative functions were integrated. The same kings who ruled on the throne also fought on the war fields. Today, the heads of state, practically none of them have fought in the army. They are primarily administrators, and the martial soldiers, they are entirely different. Another issue is that today the principles of dharma are often difficult to discern. Who is right and who is wrong? In fact, that was so at the past also. Dharma se tattvam nihitam guhayam. The whole Bhagavatam, the whole Mahabharata actually is a quest for understanding dharma. Different people at different times are striving to understand what is dharma, how they should act. So now, from the Bhagavatam's perspective, or from the Bhagavad Gita's perspective, primarily, which morphs or grows into the Bhagavatam's perspective, from the Bhagavad Gita's perspective, the process of establishing dharma has both aspects. The Brahminical aspect of sharing spiritual knowledge, and the Kshatriya aspect of doing practical things for maintaining law and order. And both are considered dharma. So Kshatriyas often have to use violence. Kshatrayate iti Kshatriya. Those who protect people from hurt, they are called as Kshatriyas. Now, some people say that the Bhagavad Gita talked about war, and today also there are terrorists who talk about war. They talk about jihad. So in one sense, people say that it's similar, isn't it? Actually, there's a huge amount of dissimilarity, because the Kshatriyas fight war according to certain principles. Even when the Kurukshetra war took place, that war never involved attacking civilians. An area was allocated for the war, that was the Kurukshetra area, and there were only fighters, soldiers and warriors who were there, who were attacked. Even the helpers, such as the other people who were there in the camp, the cooks, the cleaners, and all the other people who would take care of the warriors when they returned at night, none of them were considered to be attackable. They were not meant to be attacked. So Kshatriya warfare meant that the warriors fight each other when they are equal, when they are equipped, and when they are alert. When they are equal, that means an elephant warrior should not fight with a foot soldier. A chariot warrior should not attack a foot soldier. A chariot warrior should fight with a chariot warrior, an elephant warrior. So basically, those who are those who are having some vehicles, they should fight with those who have vehicles. And In this way, the wars were fought between both of them when they're equal, not only equal, when they are equipped. Now, if the opponent is not having a weapon at that time to attack, is improper. And if they're not alert, then at that time also it's not proper. So equal, equipped and alert. And if we see modern terrorism, it is exactly the opposite. It is, there are people who are trained to fight, to kill, and they are attacking civilians who are not equal to them, who are not equipped and who are not alert. People are just going around in the normal course of lives, and terrorists attack and kill them. So this is barbarous. The nearest that anything in the Mahabharata comes to what we could more call modern terrorism is Ashwathama's night massacre of the Pandavas' sons and the remaining Pandava soldiers on the 18th night. And that Ashwathama's massacre gets universal condemnation. It is universally condemned by everyone. It's reprehensible. That is, so far away from the standard way of fighting that when Ashwathama proposes it, his associates Kritavarman and Kripa, they are so appalled that they can't even speak any words. They say, what you are saying, Kripa tells him, is beyond contemplation. What to speak of action? He says, give up such thoughts immediately. Unfortunately, at that time, Ashwathama it goes ahead and executes those thoughts. That is a whole different story. But the point is, it is reprehensible, completely opposed to Kshatriya standards. So now, sometimes destruction is needed for creation. Just like if we want to renovate a house, then some walls, some floors may need to be destroyed so that something better can be brought over there. So destruction itself is not bad. Destruction, when it is regulated for the purpose of creation, then it is constructive, it is positive. But when destruction is unwarranted, unregulated, then it becomes wholly tamoguna. So the Kshatriyas, when they fight violence, that is for the purpose of establishing dharma, and they fight according to the principles of dharma. Whereas modern terrorists, when they fight, it is simply tamoguna. It is simply primarily destruction for the sake of destruction. Destruction for the sake of attracting attention. Destruction for the sake of causing fear. Destruction for the sake of creating glamour for themselves among people who have similar tamasic mentalities. Now we will come to the modern causes of terrorism. So in today's world, much terrorism is associated with Islamic terrorism, and this association draws strong emotional reactions from various parties. Now, there are liberal defendants of Islam who say that terrorism has no religion, and in fact there are some, even Barack Obama was criticized for not using Islam to refer to ISIS, which has in its own very name it says Islamic State, but Obama was saying that this is not Islam, and some people criticized him for that. So there are the liberals who want to disconnect all terrorism from any religious cause, and there are others who want to pin the blame for terrorism on one religion and that religious ideology. So now both these are extremes, and we need to of course see from today's socio-political perspective, but such socio-political perspectives have to be subordinated to the spiritual perspective or the philosophical perspective. So the primary philosophical perspective that the Bhagavad Gita offers us is that of Sattvaguna, Rajoguna, Tamoguna. So terrorism is an act of Tamoguna. Kshatriya violence is an act of Rajoguna. There is destruction, but that is for the purpose of doing something better, and it is very regulated in terms of the principles according to which it is fought, and that regulation is Sattvaguna. So Tamoguna, wherever it is excessive, that causes destruction, and often wanton destruction at that. So if we see, Tamoguna is a feature of material existence, but it has to be a regulated feature. When it becomes unregulated, then it causes unwarranted destruction. And unwarranted destruction has been there throughout the world's history. So we see that at one level, the way Hitler killed millions of Jews, 6 million Jews, and a total of 12 million people in the Holocaust itself, that is horrendous tamoguna. That is terrorism. Even in the modern times, now the idea of a suicide bomber causes great terror, and not just terror among potential victims, but the very idea that somebody will blow oneself up to kill some other people, that itself causes revulsion. But the idea of terror, becoming terrorist bombers or suicide bombers, that was started not with Islam, that was started with LTT, which had no religious background to its cause. So it was primarily a geopolitical agitation. LTT was a terrorist organization was a militant organization, was an aggressive insurgent organization in Sri Lanka. Now, if we see from the spiritual perspective, wherever tamoguna is, tamoguna will cause unwarranted violence, and that tamoguna can rationalize itself from various causes. It may be from geographical causes, it may be from economic causes, it may be from even sociological, scientific causes. When Hitler, he thought that he was a great follower of Darwin, and he thought that species are going to, the human races are also going to evolve, and eventually the most fit race among the human races is going to survive. And he imagined that the Aryans, he considered the Germans to be the original Aryans, and he said they are the fittest race and they are going to survive, and the Jews are the most unfit race and they are going to become extinct, but I can help evolution on the way, and I can help that by empowering the Aryans, modern day Aryans, the Germans, Nazi Germans specifically, and destroying the Jews. So of course, social Darwinism as a theory has been discredited thereafter, even in mainstream academia and science. But the point is, he drew scientific rationalization. We don't blame science and try to reject science or abolish science because it was abused so monstrously. So now we consider a causal link here, that does Islam cause terrorism? Yes, it does. As I said, ISIS is itself Islamic, and Islamic ideology can be interpreted or misinterpreted to cause terrorist violence, and it is being done. Now, to deny the causal link between Islam and terrorism is to turn a blind eye towards reality. But what is also an equally blind eye is to say that Islam alone is the cause of terrorism. So that means that if Islam itself were intrinsically a cause of terrorism, then why is the upsurge in terrorism, especially more in the last 50 or so years? Islam has been around for 1500 years. So every religion goes through different phases, and at particular times the tamasic phase in a particular religion can become more, and when that becomes more, that religion acts, the followers of that religion act in brutal ways. Now if we consider the Bible, then even especially in the Old Testament, there are statements that can be used to incite violence against others. And the crusades that were fought, they had a religious inspiration to them. The crusades were wars that were fought between the Christians and the Muslims, and they were fought to try to reclaim Jerusalem, which was the holy land for both of them. So now there, quite often the motivation was derived from biblical religion, from biblical texts. And now modern biblical scholars have also analyzed and shown how it is not the only application. It can be misapplication of biblical text also. So the point is that even the Bhagavad Gita itself can be used by some to rationalize violence. So for example, there's an Indian political writer. He said that India's biggest mistake after becoming independent was that it did not follow the Bhagavad Gita. And his interpretation of following the Bhagavad Gita was that within minutes of the creation of Pakistan, India should have attacked Pakistan and eliminated Pakistan, annexed Pakistan. Then that would have been the application of Bhagavad Gita. Now, we cannot translate the Bhagavad Gita's call for war to Arjuna to today's socio-political reality. If we see the way Krishna tells Arjuna to fight, in 3.30 he says that Mai sarvani karmani sanyasya adhyatma chetasa nirashir nirmamo bhutva yuddhyasva vigatajvaraha. So yuddhyasva, it is a call for fighting. But that call for fighting is based on, what is he saying? Mai sarvani karmani sanyasya. So offer the fruits of all your work to me. Sanyasya adhyatma chetasa, have spiritual consciousness. Nirashir nirmamo bhutva, have no desire, have no possessiveness. Yuddhyasva vigatajvara. Now actually, say desire and possessiveness, they are the primary motivations for war in today's world. So the Bhagavad Gita is talking about a very different kind of war. So the point is that I was talking about the causal link, that can Islam cause war? Can Islamic ideology be used to rationalize and justify terrorism? Yes, it can be. Now, can we discuss that way? Science can also be used to rationalize and cause war. Nationalism can also be used or abused to cause war, to cause violence, to justify even brutal violence like terrorism. And similarly, in various religious texts also, there are passages, there are sections that can be used to justify war, aggression, and even brutality. And sometimes it has happened in various religions. So to equate all terrorism with a particular religion is not only not historically or factually correct, it is also not philosophically correct. So what causes destruction is tamoguna. Now tamoguna can be incited by various causes. Now it is true, factually speaking, that the incidences of Islamic terrorism are far, far greater than the terrorism or violence caused by other religions or other causes also. So I'll conclude this talk briefly now. So I was saying that it is tamoguna which causes destruction, and tamoguna can masquerade through various causes, can appear through various causes. Now if we consider Islamic history, yes, it is true that Islam has been used as a justification for a lot of brutal violence. And why is that? Again, from the Gita's perspective, there are dual roles. In general, within the broad culture of the Gita, there is a separation of power between Brahmanas and Kshatriyas. The Brahmanas had intellectual and spiritual power. The Kshatriyas had martial and political power. And both of them worked together. So the Brahmanas, they brought about regulation. And the Kshatriyas, they brought about protection. Protection involves destruction, protection involves maintenance also. So the Brahmanas brought balance to that. And whatever ideology, whatever religion, whatever thought system has spread in this world, it has been by this combination of Brahmanas and Kshatriyas. So Jesus was the Brahmanical kind of person, and Paul was somewhere like a Kshatriya. And later on there's a Roman emperor who took up the mantle. And that's how Christianity spread. Buddhism was a fringe doctrine for many centuries till Ashoka took it up. He was a Kshatriya. He was influenced by a Brahmanical monk of the Buddhist order. So this combination of Brahmana and Kshatriya leads to the spreading of any ideology or any thought system. And now in Islam, Muhammad was both. He acted as the Brahmana in the sense that he revealed the Quran, and he acted as a Kshatriya in the sense that he fought the war. Now, subsequent generations of Muslim leaders have largely focused on the martial example of Muhammad far more than his intellectual or spiritual example. Now, when people are fighting the war, the nature of real politics is that sometimes war principles are violated. Unfortunately, this happens even in the Mahabharata war. And now that it is not that such a violation of war principles is not to be made into a principle in itself. And unfortunately, because subsequent generations of Muslim leaders have taken Muhammad's martial example much more than his spiritual or intellectual example. So as a society or as a group, Islam as it exists today is very significantly a search for political power. individually there are many pious Muslims. Those who try to say that all Muslims are terrorists, factually also, this is an absurd statement to make. Today, as per census, every fourth person in the world is a Muslim. Now, if all Muslims were violent, if all Muslims were terrorists, then the world would be hellish. So that's definitely not true. And there have been many Muslims who have practiced Islam as an individual practice, for following namaz, giving charity, and doing various things by which they have raised their consciousness. So there are pious Muslims, and there have been some Muslims who have been saintly also individually, but collectively, the leaders of Islam have quite often have been more of those politically searching for power. So rather than being a religion that is a spiritual search for truth, it has been a political search for power. And quite often, the Quran's teachings are subordinated and misappropriated for the purpose of rationalizing this political search for power. And in this political search for power, often brutality is done in the form of terrorism. Now, there are Islamic intellectuals who strongly contest the interpretations of the Quran where terrorism is justified, but there are others who support it, and quite often such intellectuals are propped up, are supported by the political leaders who want to manipulate gullible young men into becoming machines of death. So this mixing up of Kshatriya and Brahmana roles, and the emulation of the Kshatriya aspect far more than the Brahmana aspect, is the cause of Islam becoming associated with terrorism quite a lot. And ultimately, we as spiritualists who want to practice the Bhagavad Gita, we need to see that it is not any particular religion that is the cause, that it is tamoguna that is the cause. And when there is branding of a particular religion, then we are actually philosophically uninformed. Now, we are practicing what is called as Islamophobia. There has to be a healthy fear of things that cause danger and trouble, but there has to not an irrational fear of everything associated with something. Just like when some people get a disease, then sometimes everybody in the family or the whole family is boycotted by people who think this whole disease might be infectious. Now, that sort of thing is not necessary. We have to have educated vision to know what the disease is and what is needed to prevent the spreading of that disease, and what is not needed for preventing the disease. It's not that everybody who is in the family of a deceased person have to be treated as untouchables, have to be rejected. No, that's not needed. So similarly, we have to see that tamoguna is the cause, and how tamoguna can increase, and what causes tamoguna to increase, that has to be understood and that has to be countered. So individually, when we practice spirituality, when we study the Bhagavad Gita, when we practice mantra meditation, we may feel as if, what am I doing? There is so much problem in this world. What can I do for it? Actually, if we understand that tamoguna is ultimately the cause, and if we raise ourselves towards the sattva guna, if we raise ourselves beyond sattva towards shuddha sattva, towards the spiritual way of living, we are contributing in a small way towards countering the root cause, that is the degradation of human consciousness. And last part is that they are and of course, so this is just the individual level. As I said, it has to be combated at an individual level. We as individuals brahmanically need to work towards raising our own consciousness and sharing the spiritual knowledge that helps others to raise their consciousness. And secondarily, we need to work towards having strong governmental and political mechanisms needed to protect and to counter. So military action is definitely needed. Where there is violence, there has to be violence in reaction. The Bhagavad Gita certainly tells that may be necessary, but the Bhagavad Gita decides that is the last resort, and that is definitely not the only solution. So certainly terrorists, it's not that peacekeeping measures alone are going to help. Terrorism has to be countered by military action, but military action alone is not the solution, and that there has to be a redressal of grievances when there are problems, and there has to be a addressing of the violations of law aggressively also, in terms of what the Kshatriyas are supposed to do, what the Brahmanas are supposed to do. So we as individuals, the more we contribute to making a society with goodness, to that extent we will be able to contribute towards countering terrorism. And the Gita's insight in that sense is to look at things from their ultimate causes. Ultimate cause is the disconnection from spiritual consciousness, the degradation of human consciousness towards tamoguna. And the solution is the elevation of human consciousness. Now, in the elevation of human consciousness, people who are a large majority of people simply want to get on with their lives and live better lives. And if anything helps them to do that, they accept it. So the elevation of human consciousness can be done by intellectual and spiritual means. And at the same time, there will be people who will not be willing to raise their consciousness. As we see, even at the time of Krishna, the Kauravas were not ready to raise their consciousness, and then they had to be martially dealt with. So martial action is also required, but martial action has to be informed philosophically, not just be a vindictive reaction against a particular group. And the informed philosophical vision can help us to both individually and collectively contribute towards countering the cause of terrorism, countering the scourge of terrorism. Thank you. So now here I'll take some questions. Some people argue that if people can't express themselves democratically, for example, if they can't vote to change the government, they are justified in carrying out terrorism. What is your opinion? Yeah, there is the impulse to destroy that which we cannot change. So all revolutions ultimately come when people feel frustrated with the existing systems, so much so that they feel that the existing system itself has to be destroyed. However, destruction is something far easier to do than reconstruction. So quite often there might be some insurgent groups who destroy buildings, destroy government offices, destroy bridges and things like that. And if somehow or the other later they grab power, they may be in power for years and very little positive construction happens. So when we give in to the tamasic impulse to destroy because we can't change, then it is not just that we are destroying things, we are actually increasing the influence of tamoguna on ourselves. And that tamoguna will not allow us later on the freedom to act in higher modes. So that's why it is not that violence itself has to be ruled out, but violence also has to be regulated. Irrational, indiscriminate violence, even against people who are not to be blamed, people who have done nothing wrong at a specific individual level. That is what terrorists do. That is completely tamasic. So yes, change requires assertive action, and sometimes it may require violence also. But if we give in to the impulse for violence indiscriminately, then we get caught in tamoguna, which traps us and which leads to a trap where people can easily destroy, but they can't construct. And that's why wherever there are revolutions, there is an upsurge of expectation after the revolution, but quite often things don't change much because the revolutionaries, they get caught in the rejection mentality and rejection destruction mentality, and when construction or rejuvenation comes up, they are not able to do that because tamoguna has trapped them. So tamoguna as a practical measure can be used. We have to sleep, so we also have to destroy certain things, but that has to be done very much under regulation so that later on there can be reconstruction. Okay, next question. What is the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter? Yeah, at one level we could say this is subjective. Say a person who is fighting in Kashmir in India for independence of Kashmir or for protection against protection of the Kashmiris, they may be considered by the Kashmiris to be a freedom fighter, and Indians may label them as a terrorist. So once we go into various specific geopolitical causes, the nomenclature is not important. It is the conduct that is important. If innocent people are being targeted as a matter of vendetta, then such action is not worthy of a person who claims to fight for a principled cause. Today, especially the Western media highlights how Indian and the Indian army does some excesses in Kashmir. But quite often, while talking about this, what is completely or largely neglected is that there have been Muslim insurgents who have been doing excesses against Hindu families over there. The whole, in 1989 or so, the whole thousands of Kashmiri Pandits were either annihilated or were driven out of, they had to flee from Kashmir. And a similar drive is to some small extent being attempted today wherever it is possible for the insurgents to do so. So if we are going to call this as freedom fighting, that people who have lived for generations in a particular place are forced to flee, or they are killed, this is definitely not the cause of any principled action. It is brutal, inhuman violence. So the difference is in terms of the way one conducts oneself. If one is brutally, indiscriminately targeting innocent people who are not directly involved in the cause that one is agitating for, then that is not at all the action of any principled person. So terrorism, as I said, is defined by attacking civilians. It is defined by attacking people who are not directly involved in warfare. That itself is vintage terrorism. Yeah. Question: how should one behave with non-religious people or people who are not Krishna consciousness? So actually, even among the people who are not practicing any kind of spirituality, we also need to know that they can also be in goodness, passion, or ignorance, sattva-guna, rajoguna, tamoguna. And depending on the mode that they are in, they may be attracted to different things in their own lives. So when we are dealing with them, we need to conduct ourselves in a way that we become a connecting link between them and Krishna. So if we see that they are just non-spiritualists, we are seeing them partially. We understand, even if they are non-spiritualists, they are also souls who are parts of God, and they also need love for God as much as everyone else. So by focusing not on their present conduct, but focusing on their spiritual essence and the need of their spiritual essence, we can act appropriately. Now, we don't have to necessarily push down any philosophy in our first interaction or even in our second or third interaction. We can, if people after interacting with devotees, with spiritualists, feel that, oh, I met a nice person, this person is intelligent person, and they're living some life of principles, that itself will create a jnat sukriti for them. So we don't have to flaunt our spirituality in front of others just to show them how spiritual we are. We can act in a way that they get a positive impression of Krishna and his devotees. And how much they will come closer to Krishna, that is up to them. So if they have some questions, we can try to answer in the most intelligible possible way. Not just give the right answer, but give the right answer in the right way by which they get a proper understanding. And rather than judging non-devotees to be non-devotees, we can see them as essentially devotees who are covered by a non-devotional layer right now, and we have the opportunity to behave in a way that their non-devotional covering can be removed and that they can come closer to Krishna. Okay, if terrorists call and remember Allah at the time of death or when they blow themselves, what happens to them after death? Actually, there is God and there is one's conception of God, and the two are not the same. There is God who is revealed in scripture, and there are different people who can have different conceptions of God. So quite often terrorists are brainwashed into believing in a particular God who is more a projection of their imagination than a revelation coming from scripture. So a God who rewards brutal killers of innocent people with 84 virgins in Jannat or whatever they are brainwashed into believing. This is not the God of revelation. This is the God of human imagination. So when people may remember such a God, and people may remember may say Allah at that time, but ultimately it is not that just calling Allah at the time of death is going to give one an exalted destination. It is a lifelong cultivation of consciousness that is required. So if somebody has cultivated a lifetime of tamoguna, has acted tamasically even up to the moment of death, just chanting the name of Allah at the time of death is not going to make any major difference in people's lives. So they are going to get, that may give some piety at the time of death, but the overall consciousness that they have cultivated throughout their life, if that is tamasic, then they are going to get a tamasic destination, irrespective of whatever they believe and irrespective of what names they chant at the time of death. So question, Prabhupada said that poisonous snakes should be killed. So can we say that terrorists are poisonous snakes and should be killed without being given lawyer? Should terrorists be given proper funeral as per their religion? Answer, there are two different things over here. That there are poisonous snakes who should be killed. That's something talked about in the Bhagavatam. Sarpa apivrushchika modita hatya. So that sadhopi modita. So basically, that when a snake or scorpion is killed, even the saintly, they rejoice. Now at the same time, if we are not saintly, we don't have a right to kill anyone like that, indiscriminately. And very often when we assume that somebody is a terrorist, it's not that every terrorist is equally dark black. Now some terrorists may be drafted unwittingly into a cause and then they just get entangled and they can't come out. Some terrorists may be outright malevolent, meant out to destroy everyone. So there has to be a due process of law followed for dealing with situations. Now of course, if there is a war going on at that time, there may be shoot at sight orders, but in general, to brand everyone who is associated with a terrorist organization as a poison snake, that is quite often a incomplete and incorrect vision, and the due process of law needs to be followed for punishment, of which of course may not necessarily apply when there are emergencies or when there are wars going on. And as far as giving proper funeral, that is something which will again vary according to time, place, circumstance. We see that in the Ramayana, Lord Ram arranges for the proper funeral of Ravana also, and Vibhishan is reluctant to perform the funeral rites of Ravana because he says this was such a wicked demon who abducted Sita. But Ram says that no, that the soul is ultimately pure and no resentment should be held against the soul. So and Ram, at Ram's instruction, Vibhishan does perform the funeral rites for Ravana also. So question, why do we have so much difference in the message of God among different religions? Answer, there are three different aspects to this. First is the difference in context, second is the difference in content, and the third is difference in emphasis. So difference in context means that there is different times, the different messengers of God they appear at different times, and because of that they have to give message according to their context. So the way, say, assembly of sages will be instructed may be very different from the way an assembly of warriors may be instructed, or an assembly of merchants may be instructed. Even today, if we see our essential, if we have devotees who are giving talks, if they are giving talks to specific audiences, they may speak in different ways. So the context determines to a large extent how the content will be presented. Even in the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, we see significant difference. The Bhagavatam primarily focuses on renunciation because it is spoken to a person who is about to die, Parikshit Maharaj. So the consistent theme is renunciation, 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 and the glorification of renunciation. The Bhagavad Gita, on the other hand, focuses primarily on action, 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 because the context is Krishna wants Arjuna to fight the war. And renunciation itself is actually repeatedly disapproved in the Bhagavad Gita. So is it that renunciation is bad and action is good, or renunciation is good and action is bad? No, the context is determining that. So similarly, just as we see diversity in today's world and we see diversity in the Vedic scriptures also between diversity that is caused by emphasis, by stress, by context. Similarly, there can be contexts where people may be in a very primitive, very low level of consciousness, and accordingly the revelation may have to be given at a very preliminary level to them. That context is there. Now even in content, that sometimes it's not that the full message is revealed. According to some partial message may be revealed, and we have to look at the content. If we look at the Old Testament, the New Testament, or the Quran, there is very little philosophy in these. The Old Testament is primarily stories of the Jews as they met various adventures and misadventures in their search for the promised land. The New Testament is primarily an account of the life of Jesus and subsequently the epistles, the letters of Paul. So neither of these have much philosophy per se. Now similarly, the Quran is primarily a revelation that Muhammad had at different times, in different places, in different circumstances, and many years later it all was put together as a book. So it is just unidirectional, unilateral insights that are given. So there is no discussion, there is no question answer, there is no elaborate philosophical exposition. Now I'm not saying that Judaism, Christianity and Islam don't have philosophy. There are subsequent philosophers, thinkers who have derived philosophy based on whatever is given in these books, and they have integrated with various existing thought systems to come up with their own philosophical systems. But the point is, the content will vary because none of these books, Old Testament, New Testament and Quran, are spoken to people who are seriously seeking to philosophically understand life's ultimate purpose. On the other hand, if you see Bhagavatam and many of the Vedic texts, especially the Upanishads, they are spoken to, they are discussions between people who are dedicated to the transcendental purpose, so transcending life's purpose. So in that sense, we have a significant difference in content. So positive description of the spiritual world, positive description of God, positive deep philosophical analysis of things. There's nothing like, say, the three modes of material nature. There's no typology like that for analyzing the material world given in the scriptures of the other religions, of the Abrahamic religions especially. And lastly, difference in emphasis. So the difference in emphasis comes from the leaders who are teaching that particular book. So we see that the Bhagavad Gita also has the context of war. But none of the great commentators in the Bhagavad Gita, starting from Shankaracharya down to Ramanujacharya to Vishwacharya to Valle Vidyabhushan, although they lived at a time when there was Islamic aggression in India, and still they did not focus on the martial context of the Gita and interpret the Gita as a call for martial aggression, martial retaliation against Islamic aggression. So that was not their stress at all. They focused on the universal, devotional, transcendental message of the Bhagavad Gita. And that's how the Bhagavad Gita has been understood. So what will be stressed in a particular book depends on the leaders who are teaching that book and who are working towards administering or implementing the teachings of that book in their own society and their own lives. So because of these three things, so in Islam, as I mentioned earlier in the class, that the Kshatriya aspect of Muhammad's life has been stressed by subsequent generation of Islamic leaders far more than the Brahmana aspect. And that is why the martial teachings of the Quran are often highlighted, and that's what has been indoctrinated to people who eventually become terrorists and machines of death. So the differences come because of differences in the message of God come because of difference of context, content, and stress. Thank you. So, question: sometimes devotees are very rigid and adamant in having people to take up to Krishna consciousness. How far is this to be approved? Yes, this is, our movement will go through various phases, and this is how every religious movement goes through. There is initially the vision, the mission of conversion, where the idea of conversion is, there is a, if we consider a concentric, if a circle, where there is a rigid dividing line and between insiders and outsiders. So those who are following a particular principles according to a particular interpretation of those principles, according to a particular application of those principles, those who are doing specific practices, they are considered insiders, and remaining people are considered outsiders. And outsiders are somehow pulled and pushed and dragged to try to become insiders, otherwise they are often scorned. So it is best that this sort of thing, it's always going to happen in the initial stages, but eventually as we mature, as Sattva Guna comes more and more, we recognize that the broad Vedic vision is not like a rigid division of insider and outsider, rather raising consciousness of people, which is our ultimate purpose, that is to be envisioned as a set of concentric circles of expanding radii, and different people will situate themselves at different situations with different locations within these concentric circles. So there may be people who rigidly follow the principles of bhakti as given by Srila Prabhupada in terms of 16 rounds and 4 regulative principles. But there may be others who chant a few rounds and who follow some of the principles, but they are inclined, they are favorable towards Krishna, they have a culture of Krishna bhakti, and they are ready to help in various ways. So there may be people who are in general God conscious, but they are not necessarily connected with any spiritual organization. They are also congenial towards bhakti, but they themselves don't want to practice bhakti. So we don't have to alienate such people. We have to recognize that even in the past, when Satyuga was there, not everyone was ready for the commitment required for going back to the spiritual world in one lifetime. And the Vedic culture accommodates that you can take this journey over many lifetimes also. And there will be different people who will want to take up spiritual progress at different paces. And we shouldn't present spirituality as something like a digital logic, 1 or 0. You follow this, then you are going back to God. If you are not following this, you are going to go to hell. And we condemn them for that. No, it's spiritual progress is more like a analog ascension, gradual heightening, and different people will be at different levels. So na buddhibhedam janayed ajnanam karma sanginam joshayet sarva karmani vidwan yukta samachara. Krishna says, don't disturb people's minds, rather engage them according to what level is comfortable for them without disturbing them. So we should, in our interactions with people, we need to present them the spiritual message in an appealing way and facilitate them in practicing that message. And then how much they practice, we have to give them freedom. If we try to impose, they go away and often they become anti. So that is something which is very undesirable. Rather than having a few people who become very rigidly practitioners and many who become hostile to us, we need to recognize that we will have a core group of serious practitioners, and there we will have many other groups of people who will be favorable to us and practicing at various degrees. Prabhupada did say that one moon is better than 1,000 stars, but that does not mean that the star's light has to be shut down. The stars are also giving light, and the star's light also has to be acknowledged. So similarly, people who are very committed, and they are going to be the core members, but that does not mean everyone else has to be trivialized or demonized as non-devotees. No, there can be devotees who are not necessarily sadhakas according to a particular interpretation of sadhana or a particular standard of sadhana. There can be bhaktas who may not be sadhakas, and we have to appreciate their bhakti, and we have to facilitate their bhakti according to what they can accept. So we don't antagonize people who can't follow particular standards, but rather facilitate them to follow at whatever level they can. And we give them spiritual knowledge that by which they can move onwards in their bhakti. Yes, well-wishers to have opportunity, abundant opportunity. In fact, we see Prabhupada himself, he had the standard of 4 Ayurveda principles and 16 rounds for initiation. But when he came to India, now, and this was very easily accepted by his Western audience, because they had, especially the hippies, they had rejected mainstream culture at that time. And they wanted something which was revolutionary. Now, but when Prabhupada came to India, India was a pious country, but not many Indians were ready for this level of commitment. And what did Prabhupada do? He offered them a very broad circle, which was life membership. Life membership means literally no commitment in terms of practice, but a connection. A connection in terms of people feel that I am a life member of ISKCON. They give some financial contribution. They come to the temple sometime. So Prabhupada himself has set a very good example of offering connection without demanding excessively high commitment. We give people opportunities to connect with them at various levels according to what is comfortable for them, and we encourage them to have higher and higher levels of commitment, but we don't make the connection, make the availability of the connection conditional to a particular level of commitment. We provide them the facility to practice bhakti at whatever level they are, and that way they will comfortably come, they will slowly but steadily come towards Krishna. Those who want to come rapidly, for them all facility is there, but those who can't come that rapidly, they should not be alienated by being branded as non-devotees. They are also devotees, they are also bhaktas, but they may not be sadhakas. And we need to facilitate them practice at whatever level it is. So, and last question and then I'll stop. But if somebody has a guru, but as work in progress devotees, what happens to them at the time of death? Can the guru take them back to Godhead? Going back to Godhead is not just a matter of physical relocation. It's a matter of emotional reorientation. Sometimes we have a very simplistic idea, okay, the earth is here, this is here, and spiritual world is here. So I just have to go from here to there. No, if we have not developed love for Krishna, even if we go to the spiritual world, we'll feel very out of place there. Because everyone else is loving Krishna, everyone is interested in Krishna, and we are not interested in Krishna. So what will we do there? We will feel out of place. Just like, say, if we go to a cricket stadium where everybody is mad for cricket and we have no interest in cricket, we will feel out of place. So going back to the spiritual world is not just a matter of physical relocation. It is a matter of emotional reorientation. Emotional reorientation means the emotions that are invested in the world right now, we have to reorient and invest those emotions in Krishna. And the spiritual master is the primary inspiration and guide for us to do this emotional reorientation. Srila Prabhupada would say that we have to fly our own plane. That means each of us has to take our own responsibility for spiritual advancement. Now the spiritual master's prayers, the spiritual master's guidance, the spiritual master's mercy, all of them can help us in doing this emotional reorientation. But that emotional reorientation is our choice. It is not something which the spiritual master can choose for us. We have to choose Krishna, and that choosing Krishna means that even if Krishna doesn't become our only love in this life by our sadhana practice, Krishna should become our foremost love. We love other things in this world. It's not that we can become completely apathetic towards everything else in the world, but we have to slowly move towards making Krishna our most prominent love. We try to please Krishna, we try to serve Krishna, and in that way our emotions are invested in various things, but they are most primarily invested in Krishna. And when we live in this way, then even if we are not entirely purified, we can attain Krishna. And the spiritual master is meant to help us in doing this emotional reorientation. But this emotional reorientation is primarily our responsibility. So thank you very much for your participation and attention, and we hope to have similar sessions regularly in future, and I invite you to join them also in future. And if you have any other feedback, any other questions, you can post here and I will answer in due course on thespiritualscientist.com. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Humble obeisances.